Hi everyone, I'm going to talk about my predictions based on astrology for the week of January 14th. First, let's quickly recap my predictions for last week. As far as the stock market directions, my predictions were correct, unfortunately, only for 2 days, which was Wednesday and Friday. And when I say stock market, I mainly talk about Dow Jones and NASDAQ, so they were up more or less. Friday, I guess, was a fairly neutral day. But on Monday and Tuesday, I expected market to drop, and it actually went up. Same thing for Thursday. So let's see if I can do better this week. So as far as the background influences, I'd say things were indeed correct last week, and the same influences will continue this week. And specifically, I mean the increased probability of large snowstorms and kind of wet weather, and increased news about gas, like gas leaks or buildup of gas that leads to explosions, as well as oil, pharmaceuticals, and so forth. So we do have, I guess, ongoing storm that's covering about 44 states in the U.S. There are ongoing negotiations related to immigration and news about Judge Ginsburg undergoing surgery. So all of those relate to Jupiter, and as well as there was this news about the gas leak explosion in Paris. So this week of January 14th, these news or similar news will continue to intensify. There may be some news related to, again, immigration, to transportation internationally of goods that, again, relate to chemicals, especially chemicals that are used on the industrial scale for burning or exploding something. As well as gas prices and shipment, transportation, or legal kind of agreements and contracts that relate to gas, oil, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, navy, water, beverages, maybe religious figures. So, for example, news about some important religious figure traveling, maybe concerns about their travel, such as maybe they're spending too much money on something that maybe they should be more humble about, and or negotiations that relate to immigration and decisions that revolve around kind of international partnerships. And another large sort of influence that is happening that will be intensifying this week, but we also saw already kind of a preview of that influence last week, is the influence that leads to additional earthquakes, mining incidents. And we had this incident in China where, I guess, 21 person was killed in a mining accident. Of course, those always kind of happen on and off, but this week there may be increase of such news, and these may or may not be related to weather and earthquakes, or say there's a explosion in a gas mine because of some gas leak, and it leads to mine collapse, and that in turn may say affect the prices of related commodities, or there may be just some shipment that's delayed or cannot go through because either of the weather or because of some international negotiations, and again that affects the prices of, say, commodities that again relate to, say, steel, minerals, and chemicals, anything that is being excavated from the earth. So those issues may kind of be either tied to one another or develop independently. So independently there might be some negotiations that relate to immigration, such as the building of the wall in the US, and independently there's a mine collapse, and independently there's a snowstorm, or those things could be related and kind of just be affecting one another. So in particular, there will be additional focus on say weapons, sales of weapons, profits from weapons, as well as regulation of weapons. So for example, there may be some attack, and so the weapons, there may be discussions of regulating certain weapons, and the sales of those weapons go up, or there's a large contract that either goes through or is canceled, and again the prices or sales of the particular sort of equipment may be affected. So maybe again something along the lines of maybe some additional restrictions or losses from either weapons of the sales of the weapons, or restrictions on the sales, and therefore their prices go up, and at least temporarily the manufacturers may make more money because, again, there's a shortage or there's some potential concerns about governmental regulations. There will also likely be increased news about, again, explosions of all sorts and fires, as well as military, sort of movement of military personnel. There may be discussions whether or not something should be deployed, or personnel should be deployed, and or there may be additional news about female personnel, either female athletes or female military personnel, and about their earnings or about their uniform. And finally, there may be additional news, greater than usual, about, say, engines that again are either used for some sort of large vehicles that may or may not be used by military, or engines that are used for some machinery that is like industrial large-scale machinery used for producing some, again, I'm not sure, would be for mining equipment, for example. And so there may be, again, restrictions on those, or there may be talks about these engines or that machinery being too old. And so, therefore, again, things need to be replaced, but they're expensive. So, again, things that have to do with steel, either, minerals, chemicals, either the production, sort of excavation of these materials, sales of those materials, or shipment of those materials. And the news may have to do with either some restrictions, delays, losses, maybe something explodes, or a mine is shut down, there's temporary loss or restriction on shipment, and therefore the prices of associated other commodities or equipment go up because, again, there is a shortage of either equipment or the materials that are used to make that. Let's see, so additional news that we can expect, and I did mention that already before, both in my blog at tolstunka.com, as well as I believe on the previous video predictions, is that there may be news about sort of, I guess, leaders, where the leaders of various either governments are replaced, or large corporations may see sort of changes in their leadership, whether somebody's unpopular and they succumb to pressure, or just they're physically removed. Unfortunately, we just heard, I believe on Friday of this week, that there was an attempt of assassination of the Polish mayor of Gdańsk. And so that's kind of an extreme example, but there may be additional news of similar nature where, again, leaders are under attack, whether physically or verbally, and or they are removed, maybe because they're old, they're too rigid, and or because, again, there may be just too much pressure on them. Similarly, there may be additional news about athletes, like I said already, about the earnings of female athletes, but also earnings of athletes in general, and those may actually go up. And for some reason, or some important athletes, there may be news that their salary or their earnings have increased, but there may also be news about athletes being injured in either through shooting, fire, and or through having, kind of accidents that break their bones or teeth, unfortunately. So I would say for everyone to be careful out there, because that's just the ongoing influence, and something, just better not to rush, better to take things kind of slower, and make your plans and proceed, I guess, safely. So let's see, and specifically for the US, there will be increased focus on financial area, and there may be some discussions between the governmental leadership and leadership from large corporations and leaders from the financial institutions, and those may not see eye to eye. Perhaps there will be some disagreements about the financial policy. And also for the US, there may be some conflicts between the governmental leaders and leaders from companies that represent IT, telecommunications, social media platforms, companies that produce, batteries, drones, electric devices, generate electricity, and so forth. There may be some conflicts where maybe governmental leaders may be perceived as too kind of rigid, conservative, slow, and not open to some changes or new technologies, and vice versa. The sort of perception of the leaders of the tech kind of industry, maybe that they're too radical, or they're too, or they propose solutions that are too risky or not reliable enough, and it may result in sort of concerns about the project that relate to, say, aerospace or airlines, or again, batteries, electricity, electric cars, and things of that nature. Similarly, companies that relate to these areas on Monday, especially Monday, Tuesday, 14th, 15th, there may be additional news of sort of their earnings, and the concerns may relate to whether or not what they kind of earn domestically or produce domestically and internationally, or their international partnerships and contracts, whether or not they're in balance. And those concerns may be addressed by those companies coming up with new projects or new initiatives that are kind of focused on domestic production or domestic manufacturing or sales. Let's see, for China, both this week and especially next week, again, increased opportunity, but rather risk of earthquakes, collapses, shakeups at the governmental level, or changes in how maybe certain things are manufactured or exported, like steel, for example, or anything that has to do with like large machinery, and continued increased risk of mining accidents, collapse of the buildings that are built especially on the sandy soils or built without proper permits, or leaks of some toxic materials, and or concerns about recycling, maybe because of some contamination. And that again is both this week and especially next week, around the 25th is when we can hear about that. This whole week, both internationally and for the US, again, increased focus on, say, immigration, negotiations between foreign partners about various like contracts and tariffs, exports, and also concerns on the legal area, whether or not, again, maybe it's because of Judge Ginsburg and her health, or in general kind of legal sort of agreements. All of that will be discussed intensely, and there may be a culmination of these discussions on Friday, where parties will be almost blackmailing one another or using some hidden manipulative tactics. However, this may actually end up being resolved, or at least some of the issues may end up getting resolved over the weekend. So, between the 18th and the 20th, and then on 21st, there may be some positive news about either some international agreements being reached or some improvements in the legal area, where maybe some, say immigrants are allowed to cross the border, or maybe some shipment, that's international shipment of, say, oil or some chemicals, is being allowed to go through. And so some of these positive news may bring the market up on Monday, the 21st. So on the 21st, even if it's not, say, an up day, which I believe it will be, we will likely expect a lot of news, and again, especially related to oil, weather, chemicals, international sort of contracts and partnerships, and immigration, and most likely those news will be positive, and at the very minimum it will be a really like large sort of day for the markets, whether it's going to be up or down, which I believe the 21st is going to be a strong up move. And conversely, the sort of the Friday before that, the 18th, will most likely be a down day, where again the tensions may be culminating and sort of negotiations may be reaching some peak, or certainly will be quite tense, but that tension may actually be resolved. So more specifically, to go day by day, Monday, Tuesday, 14th and 15th, I think there's a slight possibility of these days to be up days for the markets, meaning Dow Jones, NASDAQ, and Wednesday through Friday, so the 16th through the 18th will most likely be down days, especially Friday the 16th looks like the most kind of a strongly sort of stronger probability of market going down compared to the rest of the week. And as I said, on Monday, for the US, 14th, 15th, increased focus on aerospace, IT, high-tech, telecommunications, and so forth. And some disagreements between governmental officials and the leaders from the financial institutions, perhaps about the financial policies to take. On Tuesday, and Wednesday, 15th through 16th, there may be additional probability, rather increased probability of important announcements, and that's globally, about leaders being again removed, replaced, or somehow receiving negative attention. Perhaps they're seen as heartless, uncaring, mistreating women and or children, or just not providing proper safety, perhaps for maybe their product is somehow deemed unsafe, or a particular maybe actor or social media star somehow is seen as doing something that's careless, or literally maybe a leader is removed or dies. On the 15th and 18th of January, there's going to be again increased focus on weapons, as well as sports, athletes, military, racing, fires, explosions, and risky and fast activities of any sort. So there may be additional or other increased news about, say, military being moved or on the move, whether or not something risky, some risky military move should be made, or again, increased news about athletes suffering some injuries or being injured in some accidents or issues that relate to maybe some fires or some explosions, and that may have to do with, again, weapons and or engines, and those could be, again, on the international level. And it may also affect the prices of related products. So, for example, if there's a car and they have problems with the engine, obviously the prices of those particular vehicles may go down, or there are shortages or controls or additional regulations over, say, again, steel or some sort of minerals, and therefore, or even chemicals that are used for, say, industrial scale explosives, and maybe there's a shortage of those, or perhaps there is some regulation that limits their usage, or there was bad weather that limits or prevents really the shipping of those to go through, or there is a mining accident and therefore, again, there's limited availability of those products. So all of those could be potential manifestations that lead to, obviously, shortage of related materials, and their value may actually go up because of that. On Wednesday through Monday for the US, increased focus on all these legal battles, either, again, judges, laws, immigration, any sort of negotiations with foreign partners. And there may be some important announcements around that made on the 16th and or 21st. Hopefully on the 21st, again, some of the issues at least are resolved. However, even if they're resolved, say, the government shutdown is over, or there's some contract signed with China or something along those lines, the actual follow-up, the changes to implement that will not be occurring very fast. It will be a slow, gradual change. And on the 17th, 18th, which is Thursday, Friday, globally there is an increased probability of accidents or problems with, again, aerospace, so say delays in the airports, IT, social media platforms, power outages, of those, social media platforms. So maybe some platforms not accessible for a while, and or there may be some surprising changes where, new partnerships are entered, or some project suddenly ends, and that this may be related to kind of conflicts with either governmental officials or among large corporations, where maybe a contract ends because, somebody's unhappy with the company that provides those services, which again could be electricity, telecommunications, or social media sort of platform, perhaps because the new technology is too risky, or is not reliable, is not stable, or there's some legal concerns over that, or maybe internationally some agreement is not reached, and therefore that service becomes unavailable. And as I mentioned before, this whole week, especially the 18th through the 22nd, there's a really globally, and in particularly for China, there's increased probability of like earthquakes, mudslides, building collapses, accidents that involve, ground or weakened ground, or old buildings, tunnels, bridges, and so forth, as well as oil spills, gas leaks, and other disasters. Again, all of that may affect the prices of the related commodities. Again, could be through shortages, or through bad weather delaying the shipments, or through changes in some international decisions, whether it's tariffs or some contracts or some legal agreements that somehow maybe limit the availability or prevent shipment or transportation of some of these materials. However, even though this weekend, the weekend of the 19th, 20th looked fairly, I would say stressful, more stressful than usual, the 21st looked like a fairly sort of a happy day with a lot of optimism, and I believe that will likely be an update, and at least some of the issues that may be kind of building up this week may be resolved by Monday or on Monday, and it will most likely be a happy news day. And so, to give a quick preview for the following week, I have some predictions for China for the 24th through the 26th, and especially the 25th. There may be some additional news coming out about the financial sphere related to perhaps new initiatives, and those initiatives may be perhaps a little bit more aggressive than usual, or at least perceived as such by other countries, but they will be aimed at sort of ensuring stability in the financial sphere and protecting the country's assets and real estate. But again, those initiatives will be new, and they may be seen as somewhat more of a aggressive policy. And at the same time, there may be increased concerns for China related to, again, earthquakes, mudslides, stability of either some old processes or institutions or companies, and or of the buildings, and or of the large sort of industrial projects, again, because either things were built without the proper permit, on the wrong sort of a soil, or using the improper materials. So that's all for me this week, and I hope you have a good one, and I'll talk to you next time. See you.